Welcome to Tossing Grenade the Windmills. Windmills.
Hi, my name is Matt Franklin. Tom's mic has died a horrible death, and he's asked me to take over for him for the podcast for a little while. We were introduced through our mutual friend, Andrew. Thanks, Andrew. All right, on to the podcast. Fires of Prophecy. His legs hurt. His feet hurt. His boots hurt. His stomach was empty. His lungs were heaving from a backpack filled with things he knew he didn't need, and his back felt like it would snap at any moment. If war was hell, then this was the lowest plane thereof. He looked over at his sergeant. Are we there yet? The sergeant smacked him across the face with a metal gauntlet. Tough love it was. In the old stories, everybody died. That was just the way they did things in those days. Nax reasoned as he trudged toward the city that was supposedly safe but probably wasn't. People who made up stories about the old days were just full of shit. Anyways, Nax really hoped those stories didn't apply to him. Everyone who had had any brains had already fled ahead of them, fled to Glasshouse, because somehow the prophecy would save them. Nax tried to make his mind flow somewhere else. He'd met a man once who claimed that a Soppenson monk had taught him the true secrets of the mind. Nax had spent an evening trying to learn alien secrets around the campfire. It wasn't doing any good right now. What did it matter? Sompenson's secrets were for Sompenson, not humans. 3 willows moved back and forth in the wind. At first, he didn't think there was that much to it, but then he noticed that they were in perfect sync, only there wasn't any wind. Then he noticed all of the other trees moving the other way. He tried not to think about it. Nax turned his head to the left and spit. He spit that way instead of right so he wouldn't spit down the ranks. Plort was in the row behind him, and would kindly do horrific things to Nax's lips if he caused problems at this point. He hadn't volunteered for this, but he hadn't exactly gone out of his way to avoid it. Anyone who was anyone knew that the Huff was an ideological Nimrod who wanted to do something glorious for the nation. Nax had conveniently not left to volunteer for one of the other sites at roll call, causing him to be drafted into the Huff's crazy plan. The man at the top of the tower of the last outpost flagged the drawbridge down, and the company slowly slogged inside. It was the last place they'd have to evacuate before they reached the city. The civilians they were escorting collapsed with exhaustion. No such rest for Nax. He and the other soldiers had 6 hours to load up whatever could be recovered from the outpost before they resumed their retreat against the ever-increasing march of the Fate Binder. "Remind me why we're doing this?" Nax asked Plort as he handed him one of the boxes that seemed to move aimlessly from pile to pile in no pattern that he could discern. Plort shrugged. "Fate Binder wants to keep the prophecy from happening." "And what does that have to do with us?" "He means to smash Spielgleis to do it." He grunted and took another box from Nax. "Prophecy very long and specific it is." He grunted, nearly dropped the box, and then caught it. "It needs to have Spielgleis City intact to do it. Fatebinder plans to burn them all." Nax didn't care. He just knew that some nonsensical moron thought that if they all retreated to Glasshouse, everything would be fine. Stupid. The city only had a 5-foot wall. They'd be working to raise it, but they'd never get it high enough in time. The box moving took most of the night, but they'd managed to get it done an hour before dawn. A few of the men had made a makeshift cantina where they were helping themselves to some beer that couldn't be moved. Nax wasn't one of them. He just put his head on the table and slept. He wasn't sure what time they woke him up, but he knew it hadn't been more than an hour or 2. The sergeant looked at him with a nod of approval. "Sleep when you can, son. Better than those drunken sods." Plort looked over and whispered when the Sarge was gone. "Sarge is a smart guy, but the beer wasn't to celebrate. It was to dull the pain from hauling all of this crap." Nax couldn't say he blamed them. He still felt stiff all over, and didn't know just how much of his little nap had helped. When he woke, he saw 3 clouds in the distance that looked like 3 giants battling themselves. He rubbed his eyes again and looked. No, it wasn't the light playing tricks with his eyes. There was the head, and the body, and the clubs. They were moving awfully slowly. They were definitely clobbering the crap out of each other, at least as much as clouds could. He tried not to think about it. On into sunrise, the motley band of soldiers, stragglers, refugees, and thieves marched. Nax had to concentrate very hard not to want to cleave something in two with his halberd. He felt cold through his entire body. It had seeped into him like some kind of a demon, and he wanted to get it out as fast as he could. Unfortunately, military discipline forced him to stay where he was in the line, but at that moment he hated his fellow soldiers with a passion. It didn't last, though. Despite a vicious last-minute blast of icy wind from the north, he managed to enter the gates of Glasshouse and get into an inn where he could warm up. The gates to the city were not as fortified as the outpost, but they were far more welcome. He could see the walls crowded with gaunt, frightened faces looking at the final column, hoping that they'd brought some kind of hope with them. Right. The inn was called the Gurgling Goblin, and according to Plort it was some big historical deal. An emperor had been crowned here or something. It looked pretty small to Nax. Just before he went inside he saw 3 black cats staring at him, lined up one beside another. He knew the Spatians thought that black cats were bad luck, but then again the Nuerns thought they were good luck. Technically, he shouldn't care what countries trying to destroy his homeland thought anyway, but Nax didn't care one way or the other. He opened the door and walked inside. He didn't want to think about it. He sat down as near as he could by the fire and watched as the comely but well-worn barmaid asked him his pleasure. He told her his pleasure, she smiled, slapped him, but only a little, and got him a beer. He nursed his drink like his life depended on it. The sergeant and Plort sat down at his table. Plort said, "I reckon it is only a matter of time until the fate-binder gets here now." The sergeant said, "Matter of time? No two ways about it. Sunset, he'll be here at sunset. I heard one of the spies talking earlier." Nax sniffed and sipped another swig of warm beer. "Not much of a spy." "I have good ears." "Still not much of a spy." Nax wiped his sleeve and put his drink down. "So if he's so far behind, why were we running all the way here?" Plort rolled his eyes. "'Cause he can move a lot faster, see? The fate-binder is taking it nice and slow, making sure that his supply chains can catch up to him. He's in no hurry. But we can't count on that. Plus, the longer people are here, the more preparations they can make. Basic military strategery and all that." "Strategy," the sergeant corrected, "but otherwise more or less correct. The fate-binder had proven unpredictable in the past, which means that we had to assume he'd move as fast as he could. As it is, we lingered way too long." Nax shrugged and shut up. He couldn't help but feel that the whole thing had been pointless somehow. How could they fight a wizard as powerful as that? Some even said he'd studied with the Sour. Others said he had all kinds of husher lore. With all that behind him, what were the pathetic fools in Glasshouse supposed to do to stop him? "Trust in the Prophesy," the Scalds said. Fat lot they knew. Prophecy had a way of doing what it wanted. Nax was no Scald, but he'd listened to enough tales in bars to know that people who got mixed up in a prophecy usually had no idea what they were actually messing around with. And if this fate-binder meant to destroy them, then the prophecy probably couldn't give 2 flips of a lamb's tail what happened to them. There was a low growl outside of the door. Everything in the bar went quiet. There was something in that growl that wasn't natural. Everyone looked around at the windows and at the kitchen. A few looked at the winding staircase that led to the few rooms on the 2nd floor. No one could bring themselves to look at the door outside, except Nax. He looked around, mildly confused. Everyone was terrified of it, afraid to move. It was probably just some kind of a dog or something. The door opened of its own accord. A harsh wind filled the room, colder than the one that had greeted him upon entering the town, and ghostly jaws clamped at his throat. Nax leapt backwards while the sergeant and Plort threw chairs at it. The chairs went right through it like it wasn't even there. They snarled and leapt to Plort's throat, tearing it. Nax sneered with rage and grabbed his halberd, leaning by the wall. Plort was gurgling blood by the time Nax brought the halberd down and cut the thing in 2. It evaporated like smoke. The sergeant rushed to the wall and grabbed a torch. He tried to apply it to Plort's throat, but couldn't because the burly man was thrashing about wildly. "Sit still, damn you!" the sergeant cursed. Plort complied and held still. The sergeant put the torch to his neck. A thin sheen of frostbite and ice under the blood melted away. Plort looked bad, but not dead. A Scald in the corner looked at Nax. "How did you kill it?" Nax looked back, far more concerned about the fate of his mate. "I chopped it in 2. What of it?" "You cannot kill the jaws of winter with a mortal blade, and I see nothing special about your halberd." The Scald almost sounded accusatory. "How the hell should I know?" The sergeant took a scarf and slowly wrapped it around Plort's neck. He grunted. "It will do until we can get you to a healer."
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman, and Josie Bergen Lawson. Copyright 2012, Red Anvil Amalgamated.
To fight the forces of evil!